We welcome you once again to another week in the Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast as we're looking together at the Psalms right now, just working our way through some of the great Psalms that I think, are a perfect way to start our day anyway, so I hope you're enjoying our time together. We've worked our way up, though, to a Psalm that is not exactly pleasant, but is very, very valuable, and that's Psalm 51. We've already looked at Psalm 32 and 38, which many people believe are connected with the sin that David did with Bathsheba, which is probably one of the better known stories of Scripture. We're not positive those Psalms were directly related to that fall of David, that sinful time. They're similar, however, to Psalm 51, which we know is connected with that horrible time in David's life. So just very quickly, a recap. David, as we know, is the man after God's own heart. God had blessed him. He was the king of Israel. He's now moving into his middle years. The Lord has blessed him in so many ways. And on this particular occasion, he has sent his army out to do battle, but he has stayed home. And that's been unusual for David. Usually he leads his army, but not this time. And as he does so, however, he walks out on his balcony and he looks over, and there is a beautiful woman named Bathsheba who is bathing. David catches a glimpse of her and is enamored. We have no idea. People have speculated for all these years. Did Bathsheba set David up? Did she know he would be out on his balcony? Did she entice him? Or did David have an idea that this is where she bathed at times and he set himself up? You know, we don't know any of that. This could have been totally coincidental. But we do know at the moment David looked over that balcony, he had a choice to make. Would he continue to look? And would he continue to act on what he had seen? Or would he turn back and move away from this scene and not be taken in by the temptation? But we know the storyline. We know that David stayed, and he looked, and he lusted, and he brought Bathsheba to himself. Whether she came reluctantly or willingly, again, we don't know that. But of course, David was king, and he definitely made that choice. He brought her to himself. They committed adultery. She got pregnant. When he found out she got pregnant, he tried to cover up by bringing her husband Uriah back from the battlefield, sending him home to be with his wife so it would look like perhaps he was the father of the child. Uriah didn't go for it, and as a result, he sent Uriah back to the battlefield where he had Uriah put in a place in the battle in which he would die. So in essence, David was responsible for the death and the murder of Uriah. So that's the story background. Most of you know that story. It's an ugly, ugly story, made intensely multiplied ugly by the fact that this is David, one of the great men of Scripture, one of the men who loved the Lord, and who writes many of the Psalms that we study even today. And so this is a heartbreaking scenario. Probably most of us have grown cold to it because we have heard about it and read about it so often. But we have to put ourselves in David's life and grieve with him. We have to wonder also, when David first looked at Bathsheba, and when he sinned with Bathsheba, as we'll see in this psalm, did he rationalize that sin? Apparently he did. Somehow he tried to justify or rationalize what he was doing. After all, the kings of David's time, anywhere outside of Israel, this would have been nothing. They took whatever woman they wanted from whomever they wanted at any time they wanted and never batted an eye. They never had any concern whatsoever that this was wrong. They were kings and they had the right. But David wasn't your normal king. David was the king of Israel. David was a man after God's heart. David was God's man. And so the circumstances are very different, and the consequences are very different in David's life. And so the Psalm 51, we believe, was written probably a year after he was confronted by the prophet Nathan about his sin. And David had lived in that sin for a full year without confession of that sin or dealing with it properly. And when Nathan called him out and God sent him to him, David confessed his sin and said, "I have sinned," and began the process of being restored to the Lord. Psalm 51, as best we can tell, is after that confession of sin and in a process of David being healed from his spiritual sinfulness. And so he writes this psalm with that backdrop. And so as we look at it together the rest of the week, we have to keep in mind what is happening here in Psalm 51. So if you haven't read it recently, I encourage you to read the psalm. It's not very long, 19 verses. It's a heartbreaking psalm in many ways, but very, very important in our understanding of how we deal with sin. So tomorrow we'll begin to look at how David dealt with his sin in a way that honored God, in a way that restored him to spiritual fellowship with the Lord. So we'll start that tomorrow. I hope you can join us.